You think you could survive a winter hunt on the Great Plains? No coats, no sleeping bags, no GPS, just bitter wind, falling snow, and a storm waiting to claim the careless. Imagine waking tomorrow in a teepee of canvas no thicker than a blanket. No furnace, no wool socks, no modern jacket. Only a bow, your footsteps in the drifts, and the cold cutting deeper every hour. For Native Americans, winter wasn't just weather, it was war. If you didn't master fire food and shelter, the hunt could kill you before hunger ever did. But the greatest danger wasn't the snow, it was forgetting. Knowledge passed from elders how to turn rocks into heaters, fat into fire hides, into walls of warmth. Today, most of us wouldn't last a single night. So what were those hacks? And could you use even one if your life depended on it? Winter on the Great Plains was merciless. The wind screamed like knives, the snow buried the prairie, and even the strongest hunters felt their strength pulled from their bones. Out there, survival was not about bravery. It was about knowledge, and the first line of defense was the teepee. But a teepee alone was not enough. Its outer cover, made of buffalo hide or later canvas, was thin. Against a storm, it could feel no stronger than a bedsheet. So Native Americans turned a fragile cone of poles into a living furnace with liners and smoke vents. The system was simple but brilliant. Inside the teepee, hunters hung extra layers of hide or woven mats, forming an inner wall that trapped rising heat. The space between outer and inner layers acted like insulation, the same principle used in modern double-pane windows. At the center, a fire burned, and above it, the smoke vent could be adjusted by shifting flaps at the peak. Opened in calm weather, closed tight when the wind roared, it allowed smoke to escape without losing the fire's warmth. Historical accounts from early French traders describe stepping into a Sioux teepee in midwinter and finding it warmer than a cabin with a stone hearth. Archaeologists confirm the pole and liner arrangement created a chimney effect, pulling fresh air in low, pushing smoke out high while keeping the warmth inside. The teepee was more than shelter. It was a machine of survival, a structure that could be built, taken down, and carried across miles, yet still hold steady against blizzards that froze rivers solid. Today, we buy four-season tents with aluminum poles and thermal fabric. But 500 years ago, hunters achieved the same with wood hides and fire. A reminder, survival never depended on what you owned. It depended on what you remembered. The nights were often worse than the days. On the hunt, when the sun sank behind the ridges, the real enemy arrived cold that crept through hides, through flesh, down into the bone. For Native American hunters, the question was simple: find warmth or freeze before dawn. That was when they turned to the oldest trick in the world: hot stones buried in the earth. The process began before darkness. Hunters would gather large stones from riverbeds or rocky hillsides carefully chosen for their density so they would not crack in the fire. Those stones were rolled into the flames and left to drink in the heat until they glowed faintly. Then came the moment of survival, lifting the rocks with wooden tongs or antler forks, placing them into shallow pits dug in the ground, and covering them with earth or sand. Through the long night, the stones released their stored heat, turning frozen soil into a bed of warmth. Hunters could sleep above it, or even use smaller stones wrapped in hides as hand and foot warmers. Accounts from early explorers note that plains hunters would sometimes dig a circle of stone pits inside a teepee, creating a floor that radiated heat hours after the fire had died. Archaeologists in the Dakotas have found blackened stones buried in lodge sites, evidence of this practice that kept families alive through brutal winters. It was not luxury. The heat was uneven, sometimes smoky, sometimes dangerous if the rocks shattered. But it was life, a simple physics lesson turned into a shield against death. Today we call it geothermal heating or radiant floors and pay thousands to install it in our homes. 500 years ago, Native American hunters achieved the same with firestone and knowledge passed down through memory. A reminder, survival has always been about using the earth itself as your ally. On the coast of Alaska, winter hunting meant facing storms that could strip the skin from your face. The wind blew wet and sharp, the snow mixed with icy spray, and hunters who set out for seal or caribou knew one truth: if you were wet, you were dead. Cold air alone could kill, but cold water killed faster. So the Yupik and other Arctic peoples turned to a material few outsiders would ever imagine: the inner lining of whale and seal intestines. The process was careful. After a successful hunt, women cleaned the intestines, stretching them out, drying them, and then sewing long translucent strips together with sinew thread. The result was a parka light as paper, strong as leather, and most importantly, waterproof. Beneath that outer shell, hunters wore warm layers of fur. The gut-skin parka acted like today's rain jacket, stopping the icy wind and snow from soaking the body while the furs inside trapped heat. Russian traders in the 18th century wrote of these garments, astonished that such fragile-looking coats could endure blizzards. One explorer described a hunter returning from the ice dry to the bone, though the storm had lasted 2 days. Museums today still preserve examples of these parkas, thin, translucent, stitched with tiny, precise seams that held back the ocean itself. The genius was in the combination. Fur alone could not resist water. Intestine skin alone could not keep you warm. But together they created a system, one layer shielding from wet, the other holding in heat. A survival design tested by centuries. Today, we spend hundreds on Gore-Tex jackets and layered systems. But centuries ago, native hunters achieved the same with nothing but their prey, a needle and memory. A reminder: survival doesn't come from inventing new materials. It comes from understanding how to use what nature already gives. In the far north, the cold did not only attack your body, it attacked your face. On winter hunts, hunters could cover their chests with furs, their feet with hides, their hands with mittens. But the face was always exposed. Breath turned to ice in seconds, clinging to hair, freezing to skin. And once frostbite set in, even the strongest hunter might never return. So the people of the Arctic found an answer in one of the most feared animals of the north, the wolverine. Unlike fox or wolf fur, wolverine hair has a unique property: frost will not cling to it. When hunters breathed into their hoods, the moisture that usually froze into a mask of ice simply slid off the guard hairs of the wolverine. This made it the perfect trim for hoods framing the face with a shield that kept frost at bay, while the fur beneath held the warmth in. Ethnographic records from the 19th century describe Inuit and Yupik seamstresses carefully sewing wolverine fur along the edges of parkas and hoods. Explorers noted that men wearing such hoods returned from hunts without their faces caked in ice, while others struggled to scrape frozen breath from their cheeks. Even today, Arctic researchers confirm that no synthetic fiber equals wolverine fur for resisting frost buildup. The hood was more than comfort. It was survival. A frozen face meant blindness, cracked skin, and death in the storm. But a hood lined with wolverine meant hunters could see, breathe, and fight the cold for one more day. Today we buy balaclavas, ski masks, and frost-resistant goggles. Yet centuries ago, native hunters solved the same problem with an animal most of us will never even see. A reminder: in survival, sometimes the smallest detail, a strip of fur, a line of stitches, is the difference between life and death. On the Great Plains, winter hunts stretch for days, sometimes weeks. Buffalo herds moved far, storms closed in fast, and hunters often found themselves with nothing but the meat they carried on their backs. Out there, food was not a matter of comfort. It was a matter of survival. If you ran out, the cold would take you long before hunger did. So Native Americans created one of the most powerful survival foods ever known, pemmican. The recipe was simple but precise. Strips of lean meat, usually bison, were dried over fire or in the sun until they were brittle. Then they were pounded into fibers and mixed with melted fat. Sometimes berries like chokecherries were added for flavor and vitamins. Once cooled, the mixture hardened into dense cakes, easy to pack, nearly impossible to spoil. A single pound of pemmican could provide enough calories for a hunter to travel all day in freezing weather. Historical records from fur traders in the 18th and 19th centuries note that pemmican was the backbone of the North American fur trade. The Métis of Canada supplied tons of it to Hudson's Bay Company brigades, who admitted they could not have survived long expeditions without it. Missionaries wrote of pemmican sustaining entire camps through storms when no fresh food could be found. For native hunters, pemmican was more than food. It was fuel. It meant the difference between coming back from a hunt or never returning at all. The fat burned slow, the protein rebuilt muscle, the berries kept sickness away. Today, hikers and soldiers carry energy bars, protein gels, and freeze-dried meals, but none of them matched the efficiency and endurance of pemmican, a food so effective that even modern survivalists still study it. A reminder, true survival doesn't begin with what you buy. It begins with what you can make, preserve, and carry when the world turns against you. On a winter hunt, firewood could run out, fires could die, but there was one furnace that had to keep burning the human body. Cold weather eats energy faster than hunger ever does. A man could walk into a storm strong and be too weak to lift his bow the next morning. Without the right fuel, the cold would win long before starvation set in. That is why native hunters prized fat above all else. Meat fed the stomach, but fat fed the fire inside. The science is simple. Fat carries more than twice the calories of lean meat. When digested, it burns slow and hot, releasing steady energy that keeps the body's core temperature from dropping. Hunters mixed fat into pemmican, chewed on strips of dried marrow, or boiled fatty cuts into broth. In some regions, rendered fat was carried in pouches and eaten directly during long hunts. Historical accounts from Arctic explorers in the 19th century confirm this truth. Inuit guides urged Europeans to eat blubber and marrow, warning that without fat the cold will take you. Traders wrote of native hunters who thrived on diets that outsiders considered strange: seal fat bear grease, even whipped mixtures of fat and berries called akutak, sometimes nicknamed Eskimo ice cream. It was not about taste, it was about survival. Lean meat alone could cause weakness, even sickness, what modern nutritionists call rabbit starvation. But fat turned weakness into strength, cold into endurance. Today we count calories, cut fats, and chase low-fat diets. Yet for centuries, survival in the North depended on the opposite: eating more fat, not less. A reminder in the wilderness, your body is the only heater you truly carry. Feed it right, and it will burn through the darkest winter night. On the long winter hunts, there were nights when the fire grew low and the cold pressed hard against the teepee walls. Food could be scarce, the wind endless, and despair just as dangerous as hunger. Hunters knew the truth. A man could have meat and fire, yet still lose the will to fight the cold. And once the spirit broke, the body soon followed. That is why storytelling was more than tradition. It was survival. Inside the longhouse or around a campfire, families gathered close. Elders began to speak their words, weaving old hunts, victories, and lessons learned by ancestors long gone. The stories did more than pass the time. They gave meaning to suffering, courage to endure, and laughter to push back against fear. In that circle of voices, the cold felt smaller. Ethnographers in the 19th century recorded Iroquoian winter ceremonies where entire villages would meet for days of storytelling games and rituals. Jesuit missionaries wrote of nights in Huron longhouses where the fire burned in the center, and tales of creation or great hunts echoed against the wooden beams. Even among the Sioux, winter counts, pictorial records painted on hides kept memory alive, each story marking a year survived against snow and famine. Science today confirms what those hunters already knew. Morale can decide survival as much as food or shelter. A hopeful mind releases warmth. Despair drains strength. For native hunters, storytelling was insulation for the soul. Today, we sit in heated homes, streaming shows, and scrolling feeds. But centuries ago, warmth came not only from the fire, but from voices in the dark, reminding each person they were part of something greater than the storm. A reminder survival is never only about keeping the body alive. It is about keeping the spirit burning when the night grows cold. 7 hacks. 7 ways Native Americans turn the deadliest winters into seasons of survival. From teepees lined with hides to stones that glowed with hidden fire. From fish gut parkas and wolverine hoods to pemmican and fat that fueled the body like a living stove. And finally, the oldest fire of all stories that kept the spirit burning when the storm raged outside. These were not tricks. They were systems. Knowledge carried through generations, tested by hunger, snow, and death itself. And they remind us of a truth we often forget. Survival is never about technology. It is about memory, about using what you have where you are when nothing else remains. So ask yourself, if the storm came tomorrow, which of these hacks would you remember? Leave your thoughts below and subscribe for more wisdom from the past, because the next winter is always closer than we think.